Marshal Diptendu Choudhury, retired as Commandant, National Defence College, will make a presentation on his book Indian Air Power, Contemporary and Future Dynamics. This book is available at the stall. You can buy it and get it autographed by him.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's lucky to talk. You guys have been doing a fabulous job, and I think it's entirely to your credit that I'm here. And it's wonderful to be able to speak to a packed house. But I get that, this is what happens, and that's one of the reasons for probably why I'm here, is that not too many take us for air power, and not because of anything else, because of probably very little domain knowledge or awareness of what's air power all about. Yeah? Okay. So the primary thought behind this book of mine is that, having been served in the Air Force for about 38 years, and I've seen the development of air power in my own lifetime. And I felt at a point that there's not much awareness in the open domain about air power and what an air force is to a nation. And so that was a topic of my research for my PhD, and it was on Indian air power, which was probably, my whole thesis was on the fact that it has not been adequately understood and hence not adequately leveraged in the national interest and national security. So that's where the whole story started from, and actually I had been writing for some time, and so this book is actually a collection of my essays, a whole lot of pieces which I'd written in different places. And the Center for Air Power Studies in Delhi, they said, why don't you put this book, all this together into a book, and that's how it started. And having put the book together, and I realized, once you have done something already, press the trigger, the bullet's out of the gun, and then you realize, oh, this bit of a pilot error, because this is, a little heavy on the side of more on air power and theory. I mean, some of theory, but a lot of contemporary stuff. But then there is a huge danger. And for one thing, I'm sure, is anybody who's having sleeping disorders, please buy the book. Okay, on that happy note, so this book is essentially dedicated to a magnificent profession and its keepers of the past and present, on whom rests the onerous mantle of safeguarding the nation and its skies. So, incidentally, there's some young ladies here. Anybody knows who this young lady here? She's the first Air Force fighter pilot, Avni Chaturvedi. Yeah. So I'll just go through, share some opening thoughts. In the nature of the beast, I'll tell you a little bit what air power is essentially about. Vapor trails, we'll look back into little of the past, its war history. Transformation, and this is something interesting, where air power, Indian air power, actually transited from a traditional tactical air force to a strategic one. And Path to Heavens will discuss some points and thoughts on where air power is headed. So this is a quote by one Air Commodore Jasjit Singh. He was a doyen of, I think, not only Indian air power thought, but also India's nuclear doctrine. He said that Indian Air Force is the only military institution exclusively devoted to military operations in the aerospace continuum. Interesting word, aerospace continuum, for national defense, as well as protecting our national interests, which are expanding with growth and economy and expansion of trade and commercial interests, where they can be best or only be pursued through the aerospace continuum. Little complex, but simply put, very interesting, because he talks about an aerospace continuum, where he describes an air and space as a near continuous medium. And he was prescient enough. This was written about almost 15 years ago. And that's what he meant at that point in time. So, but where does Indian Air Force history go back, flying-wise? It actually goes back a long time. In fact, in the First World War, we had Indralal Roy, a flight lieutenant, who achieved 10 air combat kills in 13 days and died at the age of 19. He was given a Distinguished Flying Cross. And that's his grave in France. That's the first day cover. But there were a lot of Indians who actually took part, but in their independent capacity. But if there was ever, he is probably the only air ace that we ever have. So the Air Force, where did it start? Way back in October 7th, And this gazette says in 1932, October 7, that's where it formed. So Indian pilots had formed in an, I beg your pardon, had fought in an independent capacity in World War One. But the Air Force was formed in 1932. It's one of the oldest independent air forces of the world, a fact which I think not too many people know. The IAF fought extensively in World War II in Europe as well. IAF pilots had gone and flown there. And they did an enormous job when the Japanese threat had come in the fight in Burma. And they've actually taken part in every conflict in India post-independence. But it was a long journey. It was an RAF first, and then the whole Indian Air Force was conceived. It was made into an Indian Air Force. Then after the wonderful job in Burma, the king was pleased, and it was named Royal Indian Air Force. And then thankfully, before independence, sometime we jettisoned that royal bit, and we remained an Indian Air Force now. So what is the nature of the beast? What is air power all about? It operates in an invisible domain, unlike the Army and the Navy. Because Army and Navy fight on defined geographies, on land, on water, which is, has a clear definition. It has, shape, form, size. Air Force operates in the air. It's very difficult, though the laws of physics hold good there as well, which most people think don't. But that's the challenge. That's why there's a little problem in understanding air power, possibly. And it fights in the air, it fights on land, it fights on sea, actually, against the enemy's Air Force, Army, and Navy. So that's an interesting aspect. It swiftly adapts and adopts to technology. I mean, in the lighter vein, way back in 1918, when the first Kitty Hawk flew, by the Wright brothers, and that's when, lighter vein, pilots say that, thanks to technology, we've been looking down on humankind ever since the Wright brothers. Okay. But yes, technology makes a huge difference. The kind of technology changed the journey of the platform, the aircraft, and the kind of wars air power was capable of. That wasn't me, nor air power. Okay, so because of change in technology, like in my service career itself, I started, when I joined the Air Force, we flew gun combat sorties. That means we had to maneuver our aircraft to gunfighting ranges of 300 meters. And within my few years of service, we went to close combat missiles. The range expanded to 1.5 kilometers. All aspect missiles, 3-4 kilometers. Beyond visual range missiles, range went up to 10. And now you have extended beyond visual range missiles, where the ranges, you can shoot down another aircraft hundreds of kilometers away. So with every expansion of the weapon capability and the aircraft capability, our tactics changed. Concepts of warfighting changed. Concepts of operations changed. And hence, we in Air Force have a tough time keeping up with ourselves. I can understand the challenge with the Army and the Navy face and understanding Air Force. What are its characteristics? Typically, air power has some defining characteristics which makes it a little unique. One is the reach. There is no traction, like the Army calls it, the favorite term is terrain traction. There is no friction tying you down. So in air, you can travel further reaches, further distances. Flexibility and versatility. That means the same platform can be used for many roles. It can be used for air defense, it can be used for offensive operations, it can be used for reconnaissance. It has a variety of roles. It has electronic warfare fitted in, and each platform can today, and especially in today's day and age, it can take on several roles. And similarly, you'll have helicopters which can as well be one day doing casualty evacuation and next day firing rockets into the enemy. We have used transport aircraft for bombing operations. So it's the platform which makes it flexible and versatile. Mobility. You can move forces, troops, a huge amount of infrastructure, assets from one place to another. So the combination of reach, flexibility, and mobility makes it very dynamic kind of a force. Responsiveness. Air defense responsiveness isn't actually in minutes. Today, if there's an intruder coming into our airspace and he's tracked from the beginning, the time it takes to scramble a fighter for interception is 2 minutes. So that is the kind of reaction and responsiveness which comes in. So because of a speed and the abilities covered earlier, the service is very responsive. Okay, I already see that 15 minutes. I'm worried like hell. Yeah, we're all terror struck here. Okay. Next is offensive lethality. I think we'll discuss that later. We've seen enough of that. Simultaneity. That means you can be doing all kinds of operations at the same time. You can be as well hitting enemy deep inside, carrying out air defense at the same time, carrying out casualty evacuation, or you can be hitting the enemy right deep inside 200-300 kilometers in the intermediate ranges of 100 kilometers and right on the borders or in the tactical battle areas where our army is fighting. And you can operate missions all through three depths, what we call as tactical, operational and strategic depths simultaneously. So that's what simultaneity is about. And trans-domain capability across large spaces of water or large distances. So what is the role of air power, frankly? So in an Indian perspective, as far as war is concerned, there are three key roles. So I put air defense in the center, and on the left is strategic and offensive strike, which is Air Force specific, and joint operations, which one does with the other services, with the Army and the Navy. So all three are three important pillars, and the air defense is in the center because air defense spills over into both. So on the left side, you have strategic offensive targeting capability because air power, because of the aircraft and the weapons it carries, you can actually go deep inside enemy territory and strike him inside where it hurts. And that's how, if you see in World War II, the bomber campaign started. They started going deep inside Europe and dropping bombs. But so that's a very important capability. That's the only capability which actually hurts the enemy deep inside its own home base and home and earth. Air defense, you have radars, you have missiles, then you have airborne radars. Essentially, they are there for safeguarding the sovereign airspace and defense. And we'll discuss a little more about it. Joint operations come in a variety of ways. That means direct support, where you're actually firing and fighting the enemy. One is keeping the enemy air away from our own troops so that they can prosecute the surface campaign easily. Other is attacking adversarial enemy troops in support of our own troops as well. And then you have a whole lot of logistics and transportation capability, para-dropping, moving weapons, troops from one place to another swiftly. In peacetime, you have a wider role. And I think the most important role in peacetime is on the extreme left is about defense of sovereign airspace. Now, this is something which very few people know, that at any given time, there are radars which are churning all along our borders, a certain radar at a certain, in a certain pattern. There are fighters which are armed and kept ready on preparedness to scramble in case of for an interception in case there's an intruder. And this is what Air Force does 24/7, 365 days in a year. When there's a firing in the border or an intrusion of, let's say, of a Sri Lankan Navy or the fishermen coming in, it makes headlines. You will never get to hear in the newspapers about an interception having taken place. So it goes on silently and quietly. So on the top left picture is where all the air defense information all over India comes in. It's a air defense node. And the entire information is processed there, and they are connected to all the bases, all the weapon systems, all the fighter squadrons everywhere. So they control everything. And the second picture is a MiG-29 with air-to-air missiles on an interception role classically. And at the bottom left is the Pechora missiles, which are used for air defense. But it has a huge role in nation building as well. And then that's, so you've seen this, one is in, I think the top left is, the uppermost one is an interesting role which takes place with immense regularity in India. Election duties. Yes, Air Force flies election commission people all over in distant places, all over. Regularly. That hundreds and hundreds of helicopter missions which go through, which are not known. Then comes, of course, airlifting and getting diaspora out from foreign troubles, hotspots internationally. We've done a lot of that. Below that is actually this helicopter is airlifting a container, Chinook helicopter in Arunachal Pradesh, in the territory where it's very difficult to get across. Then there is, on the top is helicopter putting out fires. Below that in the center with a whole lot of orange people are the NDRF who get flown regularly from one place to another place at any time because of Air Force in Hendon. They come there are very proper drills so that they're rushed to the spot of trouble. And then in the floods. But on the right is interesting is aerial diplomacy, where in the top is when we had gone to Japan for an exercise. Center one, so Air Force has a huge role when it exercises with other nations, goes abroad on goodwill missions where it does, aerobatic formation flying, our aerobatic teams take part. We train other air forces in the world. So like the Army and the Navy, the Air Force also plays a huge role in aerial diplomacy. And the second center picture with all the flags is what we had recently exercised Tarang Shakti, where that whole lot of international air forces came for the first time in India to exercise with us. There was a time we used to go around a lot to other countries to learn. I think after a long time, everyone's come to India to learn for a change. So that's cheerful. And the bottom is when we went and did an exercise in Greece. And that's Recep, the Turkish president wasn't very happy with it because we went to Greece. So it has a lot of geopolitical connotations as well. Okay, so what is the combat legacy is pretty much fought in every war post-independence from 1947, the Kashmir War, took part in Goa operations. 1962, interestingly, in the Indo-China War. Okay, incidentally, top left picture is the famous Srinagar airlift, where the troops were rushed in of the 1st Sikh Regiment and army was flown in. And that's how we still have the valley with us. And in the second picture is Canberra's carrying out aerial recce in Tibet in 62. Interestingly, in 62, the government chose not to use offensive air power despite having a fairly decent capability because of the fear that the Chinese would come and bomb our cities. So there was this whole myth in people's heads that the war would escalate. You're already fighting a war. I mean, what is there to escalate? So it defies my logic, but that was a decision. We regret that decision. I think if air power was used, it would have been a different story today. Then, of course, 65 war, where actually we washed off the ghosts and the baggage of 62, and we did a great job. But essentially, it was a war where the army fought the army, Air Force fought the Air Force. It was a little more disconnected. 71, we came together beautifully. And we did a phenomenal job in 1971. The Air Force played a huge role in both sides of the front. On the left is actually on the western sector where the tanks stopped the armored thrust in Longewala. But few people know that the Air Force actually stopped 3 major armored thrusts of 1971 because our strategy was to hold the enemy on the western front where we concentrate on the eastern front. And on the top right is the famous rocket attack on the governor's house, where actually the MiG-21 aircraft, they went and attacked the governor's house, and what triggered the surrender by the East Pakistani governor, who actually during the attack apparently went under the table and signed his resignation. Then, of course, Sri Lanka operations, Maldives, where we rushed in, again, army troops to prevent a coup in the Maldivian government. And then Kargil War, took part in UN operations, Balakot and Sindoor are the 2 latest. But interestingly in this, the challenge, if you see, 71 war, last time when we used air power in a full-fledged manner, is 50 plus years away, half a century ago. Kargil War, 1999, 25 years plus. So my argument is that over a period of time, because we haven't had a war in the intervening periods, air power had slipped in the national security architecture thinking and most of mind space. But a quiet transformation took place in the 80s. Earlier we were a tactical air force. That is what we inherited from the Brits. Because they didn't want air force to be strategic. They didn't want us to have bombers where we could go out outside, because colonial power, they wanted to keep us in place. So I think we were a tactical air force. So In mid 80s or late 80s and early 90s is when we started getting modern aircraft and modern missiles. And suddenly we started getting platforms where we could fly long distances and long ranges. And that's when we started going across with air-to-air refueling, doing exercise all the way. I have led a team all the way to the mainland US with fighters and transport aircraft to take part in an exercise. So that was a capability, it was a strategic capability. I mean, earlier we couldn't think of doing it. We couldn't go anywhere outside the country in terms of, because the fighters' ranges were not capable. But that transformation took place in around the late, I'll say it started early 80s and continued through mid 90s. And today, actually, from a tactical air force, we not only became a strategic air force, but an aerospace force, because today we have capabilities. In the top right, you can see air-to-air refueler, refueling an AWACS aircraft so that it can stay in air for a longer period of time. Then on the left are the four batteries of the famous S-400, which claimed to fame in the recent hockey match or cricket match that we had with Pakistan. And on the right is the Rafale with an enormous amount of armament capability which it carries today. Incredible. So, you know, what a formation of 8 fighters could do earlier is done by one aircraft. So that's the kind of capability increase. On the bottom, interesting picture, it's in Leh airfield, 7 C-17 heavy lift aircraft. Look at the amount of capability, force projection, which this is of. So that's how we've transformed into an aerospace power today. So as a strategic air power, today air power has transformed over time. And in fact, in most of my book covers these in chapters. I thought I'll put it in this manner so it's easier to grasp rather than reading my very monotonous writing. So what is the first thing which comes across is a cross-spectrum capability. That means air power can be used in non-conventional wars. That means in nuclear wars, it carries a nuclear weapon as well. It's an important part of a conventional warfighting capability. And what we have found that now in this time in Sindoor and Balakot, it's equally adept at subconventional or the gray zone part of warfare. Okay. And so its hard and soft power capabilities can be used in a variety of ways. Okay. Both in peace and war. Then comes multi-domain capability. Actually, air power is, because it transcends land, sea, and air and brings it out in the medium, it's a naturally a power which is very has a great affinity to multi-domain operations. Okay. Then comes strategic employment options. Again, in the nuclear role, conventional deterrence is what air power is. We look at very seriously. Then there is coercive deterrence, which occurred this time. Actually, the fact that the amount of firepower we put across actually had them worried, and because of the damage we did. We'll discuss that later. But the point is, it was used as coercive deterrence. Then there is something called asymmetric deterrence, which I like to write about a lot. Essentially, in a deterrence scenario, if you have a force which brings in a certain set of asymmetric advantage to you, that's asymmetric deterrence. And today, against China, we do have that in Tibet, but not for very long. Okay, because our air force is getting smaller, Chinese air force is getting stronger, and all that kind of stuff. And used for punitive signaling as well, which we did in Operation Sindoor. Strategic targeting. This is an independent air power role, which I mentioned earlier about offensive targeting. For example, I'll give you an example. In 71 war, 3% of Air Force's air power, offensive air power, was used against hitting enemy targets. 3 strategic targets, I beg your pardon. Industries. In this case, I'll quote an example. When we attacked the Karachi oil tanks, Sui gas plant, and there's an Attock refinery. These 3 attacks actually led to the Pakistani Air Force and the Army run into severe shortage of fuel. They were actually importing fuel from Iran by road during the war. And in the history, MOD history, which has been written by Prasad, it mentions that if Air Force had continued in this for some more time and the war had continued, Pakistan would have been in knees. It actually says that. So point I'm trying to make is just 3% of our effort look at the strategic outcome. Those days, we didn't have the capability to prosecute warfare in that manner. We could do it in such sustained effort like we did this time. So the point I'm trying to make here is that a little can produce a lot. Okay, so that's strategic targeting for you. And then comes the today's day and age. You need, of course, in modern EPA, you need a lot of knowledge, critical thinking. You need a wider skill sets, right? From what I grew up, I was talking to young Bada. Yeah, we're talking, and I said I was an art student. It was unthinkable in today in Air Force. I think they didn't catch on in time, so they let me through. So you need constant training and a kind of a strategic agility in your conceptual use of air power. And you can't be tied down to the routine modes of thinking, because air power allows you to operate and create outcomes by thinking and operating out of the box. So is the strategic capabilities of IAF, which over and above its war and peacetime responsibilities, that plays a key role in India's national security and interests, both. Quick dash into Op Sindoor. I thought this would be topical, though essentially it doesn't really form much of my book. I don't think, frankly, anywhere, because that was written before Sindoor. So these are the weapons on the left. There are two maps. The one on the left with the red circles are the first targets which we hit, terror targets, which the army hit the closer ones and the Air Force hit the two further ones in depth. Muzaffarabad and Muridke. So the weapons we used in this were imported weapons, scalp, hammer, spice, crystal mace, fancy, toolkit kind of things, but it worked against the Pakistani very well. And then on the right is the follow-on attack. After we struck, they struck back, Pakistani, the military, and they hit our airfields. Hitting an airfield is not done in peacetime. I mean, it's an act of war. So I think we were pretty generous enough. We granted them that, all right. We didn't want to escalate it. But for the first time, and I think we have shown an offensive mettle that we actually hit 9 Pakistan. I mean, those details will come later. But the star of the show were the BrahMos missile and the 2 killer drones, the Harop and the Harpy, top right and top bottom. And of course, the Rampage. These are all standoff weapons. The 2 extreme right are killer drones. So they're not launched from an aircraft, they're launched from the ground to go hover over the target and hit. So this is what happened in these 2 days. To summarize it, this is the air power tally list. Yeah. I'll quickly wind up. So look at it. 2 depth terror targets, 9 PAF bases, 3 radars, 2 SAM systems. You can read that. But what is interesting is what is written in yellow, that less than 90 hours, the entire operation, less than approximately 50 weapons used. And these attacks were carried out across a span of about 2,000 kilometers, going up to a depth of 350 kilometers. And that is air power capability. Okay. So what are the contemporary takeaways? There's so many wars and action happening all over. And in fact, I was talking to someone and I was saying, I'm running out of business because there are more air power specialists outside of Air Force today, having watched all the wars and, followed Twitter and things like that. After 1971, it's been a revival of offensive air power and its capabilities. I think that has come back to centrality of our national security and what it can do. Validation of offensive air defense. Where air defense is not defensive anymore. You can actually shoot down an adversary in his own airspace. So that's actually the word defense has become a misnomer. It has an offensive capability. While air defense defended the nation, undoubtedly, and it did a brilliant job at that, but what most of us tend to forget, it was the offensive air power hitting the enemy which actually drove him to the ceasefire. So this strategic larger national outcome was an outcome of offensive power, not a defensive power. So we need to keep that in mind when we talk about national security. Okay. But both offensive air power and air defense are intertwined. They can't be separated. They're inseparable. Long range targeting. Then today, drones and missiles. It's no longer the domain of manned aircraft anymore. Drones and missiles are a part of aerial threats and air power employment. Our challenge is different. We have two adversaries with whom we share long borders and who have strong air forces. Unlike anywhere in the Western construct of all the conflicts which we hear and read about, there is no air opposition. Think about it. Israel, Russia, Ukraine had a small air force, it went out of business very rapidly. But for us, the story is entirely different. We have two strong air forces opposing us. Herein is the importance of the threat. So the salience of air force as an air power is a vital instrument of deterrence and national security and interests. Okay. Quickly, path to the heavens. What does the future look like? I mentioned this. India's threat is unique, so it needs bespoke security strategy. We need to adapt to changing time. There's a lot of work going on that already. Numbers matter. This is as Air Force is concerned. You're all aware that numbers are shrinking, but numbers do matter, and especially with two adversaries that we have. And we are in a fifth generation trap, which is unfortunately that by the time we develop our fifth generation, it will take us a decade. The Chinese fifth generation is already flying in Tibet. By the time our fifth generation comes out, the Chinese will have the sixth generation up and running and flying, and Pakistan will be already having the fifth generation fighters before us. So we are stuck in that, in this whole Atmanirbharta business. Critically of aerospace power, asymmetric advantage in a multi-domain threat construct. This is, I think, something which our leadership today understands. It's come back in an important way. Air domain. Earlier we were happy to know whatever is there in the air domain. But nowadays, it's no longer that. You need to know the aerospace domain because a lot of our weapons transit through altitudes of near space. So you need to have visibility over that. So we need to transcend into air domain awareness to aerospace domain awareness. In a similar manner, air defense needs to become aerospace defense because it's no longer defending against an enemy air threat, but airspace threat as well. And deterrence bolstering is a national security imperative. So for India's deterrence, and if it wants to reach where it wants to reach, justifiably so, we have to tread softly but carry a big stick. Okay, with that, I'm done. Any questions, please?
You said, you of course elaborated on it by saying Atmanirbharta and all those things and fifth generation, sixth generation. But before that, you passed a very scary statement that our air capability is coming down, China is growing. Just elaborate on that a little more.
So that's been staring us in the face for the last decade and a half, almost 2 decades. What is happening is we have, so there's a little bit of history, and in fact, the last of the MiG-21s are finally phasing out. I'm going there after Pondicherry to Chandigarh. So there's a great send-off there. And 63 years. While it's great to have had the fighter for 63, but 63 years to continue on a platform where we could have had our own aircraft up and running was something which it's been a challenge simply because of the fact of it was earlier we were poor, we didn't have the technology, post-nuclear wars, sanctions, nuclear testing, we had sanctions, so we didn't get access to technology. So while we developed our aircraft, our LCA program goes back to 70s. But it's finally taking shape and not in what exactly Air Force wanted and not what they promised as well. But even in this, we are stuck dependent on American engines. So the point I'm trying to make is our Indian aviation industry, and especially military aviation, when it comes to fighter aircraft, combat aircraft, are stuck in a time warp, which you can't sort of short circuit and leap forward. You will have to go through your own developmental process. So that's why I said it's a pity, but you will still have to buy those 114 aircraft from outside. You don't have a choice. But then this is a choice we were supposed to have made 20 years ago. So that's why we're in the state. So we're going to hit the lowest that we have ever been in our combat fighter squadron strength ever since the Air Force came into being. Okay, on the scary note.
Good afternoon, sir. So my compliments to you for writing this book, sir. It's a very beautifully written book, sir. Sir, taking into account the recent warfare going on, Ukraine or Azerbaijan, Armenia or Saudi Yemen, We have seen there's been a rapid evolution of drones and counter-drone technologies. So, how do you see this balance between manned and unmanned in the future air power?
So Elon Musk is very clear on that. He says, all the people who are following the F-35 program are idiots because there's no future in manned aircraft. But the point I'm trying to make is, unfortunately, the real world is different. Wars are different. They are a reality. Hard power remains a major threat. So you need a fair amount of conventional capabilities. You can't wish it away. So every Air Force has a fairly large, major Air Forces have a large manned combat fighter platform. And every Air Force, incidentally, and most of the leading Air Forces are developing the 6th generation fighter. So they are not yet going to go away because they remain a major part of the inventory. As much as you may want to have a drone, an only drone and missile force, Iran did that. Look where it got it. It couldn't retaliate effectively. And it was hit in its own territory. Ukraine had to fall back on air denial on depending on air defense because they didn't have the capability and the Air Force to go inside Russia and target them. So they had to fall back on drones to target them. So my point is, drones and missiles, they have expanded the scope of warfare. They are a reality. Okay, there will be a growing part of future warfares and things like that. But the challenge for all the countries in the world will be how to balance this new age technology vis-a-vis a mainstay of numbers that you have, of legacy equipment which you can upgrade and modernize. Because you can't have an entire armed forces which is entirely top of the line technically. Even if you spend all our budget on that, I don't think you can achieve it. So that is where I think it is going to go.
So there's one more question.
Yeah.
This is on behalf of...
He's bought 2 of my books. Not 2, sorry. He's bought a book, so I have to be nice to him. Yeah.
This is one more question. This is on behalf of the youngsters who are planning to take up their career in armed forces, sir. So talking about Army, Air Force, Navy, be it soldiers on ground, sailors on sea, and the air warriors in the sky, whose life do you think is more exciting? Army, Air Force, or Navy?
Ask that to any of the services on a bad day. Okay. Very interestingly, we have this, sort of competition between the 3 services, but there's enormous respect for each other. But more interestingly, we always, envy some part of the other services. Like So I think Air Force has its own challenge. To my advantage, I think for me, I loved flying. So I was blessed with the fact that I had a profession which was also a passion. So I have no complaints.
I have a small supplementary to his first question. I agree with you that it has to be a combination of man and unmanned, and man much more than it has to be a combination of man and unmanned, like you said, and man much more than unmanned as of today, at least. That's my opinion. I agree with that. The small question, and you and I have discussed it in a closed chamber in USI, but here it would be nice for this audience to hear your views. That you have a deficiency of 12 or more squadrons today. We are making it up and you discuss those measures. My small point, limited point is, can this be used, this deficiency be used to make up with foreign and Indian indigenous production on one hand, but can you use this void, some of this voids, to actually leapfrog into that unmanned platforms? Because like you said, there are long gestation periods. It's going to take 10 years, 15 years. And by then, unmanned component will become very indispensable. So can we use this space to actually get the unmanned in also?
So it's a very interesting question. And that first bit must have asked, we asked this question in the chamber. It sounds very ominous, but it was a very fruitful interaction. But it's a very valid question. And this is something, it is actually already working in its own way. But the point I want to make here clear to everybody that drone technology, smaller drones is much easier. But when you want to use it as an replacement for a manned fighter, it is almost like another fighter. It's just that it doesn't have a pilot. So it needs actually much more work to do that, because in this case you have an idiot, you put him inside the cockpit, he will take it up and bring it back. But now you're relying entirely on a whole lot of other stuff. You know, that idiot is not there inside. Elon Musk said that, please. So, but that's it. So I think it's while it is seems simplistic, sir, it's got a whole lot more challenges, because for a manned platform to go and do the roles which an offensive platform does and an aircraft does, it needs a whole lot of survivability capability and a whole lot of other additional components which will make the platform bigger, more expensive and more technologically. So this is a trade-off.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, I'm Damarnath Ambala. My question is, sir, as you just now said, MiG-21 fighter jet is being decommissioned by IAF in this month. So this will drop our fighter jet squadrons to 29, which is almost a lot lesser than what we know. So what do you think Indian Air Force needs to do to maintain the air supremacy in the world? And what else do you think India needs to include in the arsenal so that it will compete with the superpowers like US, China and other things, Russia as well?
Well, now you really have me worried. You know, I thought we were just dealing with our neighbors, and now we have to think about superpowers. Yeah, okay. But it's a very, very, very valid point, actually. And you know, what has happened is, because of that technological gap which I was telling you, you know, air power is very expensive, research intensive. It's very heavy on the pocket. So unless a nation had done that long back, which we didn't, which we are starting now, so there is a gap which is an unavoidable gap. So this gap is almost 10 years old. It's going to take us, and we are still struggling with engines. So I mean, it needs us to really push our technology into an overdrive. You know, we have this huge HAL, DRDO, all these institutions which were public sector institutions earlier. They have become corporatized, but they need to get that ethos, in the sense that they need to be able to produce goods from a larger perspective of national security rather than just a company product. You know, it needs a different focus. But despite that, we have a struggle for the next 10 years, because we have to, only way we can fill it, this 114, whatever we buy, will fill in a certain gap, but there'll still be a huge gap which we will have to keep building. And the challenge is the older fleets will now start getting older and reach that level. So we are in a serious gap, which unless we scale up our production capability, China produces, just one company produces 100 fighters in a year. We can barely produce 8. So we are some way off. So I think it's easier to make friends rather than... I think we'll have to do that for some time. Thank you.